Hello, and welcome to another episode of Piper's Paraphrases. I'm Professor Pipes, and today I'm reading Act 4 of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Before we begin, let's remind ourselves of where we left off. Romeo and Juliet fell in love and secretly got married. Then Juliet's cousin Tybalt killed Romeo's best friend Mercutio, and Romeo killed Tybalt for revenge. As a result, he was banished by the prince. Friar Laurence told Romeo to say goodbye to Juliet and then go hide out in Mantua, which is exactly what he did. Unfortunately, Juliet's parents had arranged a marriage for her to Paris, and when she told them she wouldn't marry him, Capulet threatened her, and the nurse told her that maybe she should listen to her parents. The end of the act left Juliet feeling alone and betrayed. Act 4 begins at Friar Laurence's place, and he's talking to Paris, because Paris wants to arrange his wedding to Juliet. Friar Laurence warns him that maybe he should take things slowly, just like he said to Romeo, but Paris says they're moving quickly to help make Juliet happy again. Just then, his bride appears, and Paris tries to flirt, and doesn't seem to notice that she totally blows him off. Mega cringe. After Paris leaves, Juliet tells the friar he needs to come up with a plan to fix things now, or she'll take matters into her own hands. Wait, what's that in her hands? A knife! What is it with these teens brandishing knives all over the friar's living room? Friar Laurence comes up with a new and, frankly, kind of crazy plan. He warns Juliet that it will be scary, but she says she doesn't care, and then she lists all the horrible things she'd rather do than marry Paris, like be surrounded by snakes or jump off a building. Poor Paris. That's pretty harsh. Anyways, here's the plan. Step 1, tell your parents that you'll marry Paris. Gross. Step 2, on a Wednesday night, take a sleeping potion that will make you appear dead for about 2 days. Step 3, on the morning of your wedding, your parents will find you looking all dead and will place you in your family's tomb. Step 4, meanwhile, I'll send a letter to Romeo explaining things. Step 5, Romeo will come and rescue you from the tomb so you can run away together. Juliet agrees and leaves, potion in hand. In scene 2, Juliet's parents are working on wedding plans, even though their daughter hasn't actually agreed to it. Then Juliet comes in and apologizes, saying she will marry Paris. Her dad is so excited that he moves up the wedding to Wednesday, which is tomorrow. Dang, it took a year to plan my wedding. Then Capulet heads out to tell Paris the great news. So I guess the friar's whole plan has to be sped up by a full day. Easy peasy. In scene 3, Juliet says goodnight to the nurse and her mom, and when they leave, she delivers a soliloquy. A soliloquy is a speech given alone on stage by a character, which reveals the character's inner thoughts and feelings. In her speech, Juliet is scared about taking the potion because she worries that maybe it won't work, or maybe it'll kill her. She dismisses these fears, but then worries about what will happen if she wakes up in the tomb before Romeo arrives, thinking that she could go insane or suffocate. Just then, she has a vision of Tybalt's ghost. Too late on the going insane thing, I guess. So she quickly drinks the potion and falls asleep. Scene 4 lightens the mood a bit. The Capulets, the nurse, and some servants are happily preparing for the wedding. Lady Capulet and the nurse joke around and make fun of Capulet. Apparently, they've been up all night, since the scene ends with Capulet telling the nurse to go wake up Juliet. Scene 5 starts out with the nurse comedically coming in to wake up Juliet. She makes some dirty jokes about Juliet in Paris, in her classically inappropriate fashion, and says she'll send Paris in to get Juliet out of bed. Wink, wink. However, the mood quickly shifts when she realizes that Juliet is dead. Lord and Lady Capulet enter and are in complete disbelief. Capulet, in particular, is totally distraught, saying that Juliet was the only happiness in his life. Maybe you should have said that to her before, instead of telling her you didn't care if she died. Soon, Paris comes in with some musicians, and he is understandably heartbroken. Then the friar enters and acts totally shocked about Juliet's death. And the Academy Award for Best Actor goes to Friar Laurence! Anyway, he delivers a speech saying that Juliet's in a better place and encouraging her family to quickly take her to the tomb. The family leaves, and the scene ends with the nurse's servant asking the musicians to play a sad song. When they won't, he makes jokes about them being poor. They're offended, but then say that they should stick around because maybe they'll get a free meal at the funeral. Nothing ends an act like some good old-fashioned jokes about starving artists. Overall, Act 4 goes by quickly and is mostly plot-driven, driving us forward to the final act. I mean, it's Romeo and Juliet, and Romeo isn't even in this act. Most of the characters are pretty consistent in Act 4. Juliet is still freaking out and worried about her ability to be with Romeo. The nurse is still making inappropriate jokes. Friar Laurence is still coming up with complicated plans to help the teens. Paris is still in love. Capulet does shift, but really he just goes back to how he had behaved in Act 1. He reinforces how much he loved his daughter after she's died. He says that, "With my child, my joys are buried," which is similar to how he called her all my hopes in Act 1. Let's move on and talk about themes. First of all, love. In this act, we see several people making decisions based upon love, with not so great results. Of course, we see Paris's love for Juliet, which leads him to agree to a rushed wedding, without even knowing the lady's mind, as the friar says. His desperation to be married to Juliet causes him to make impulsive decisions, which clearly don't end well. Capulet's love is interesting because it is both parental and selfish. It might seem strange to a modern audience, but Capulet was demonstrating love for his daughter when he arranged the marriage between her and the Count. Count Paris is a young man who is also part of the royalty. He likely would have treated Juliet well, so arranging the match was an act of parental love. However, he was also demonstrating philautia, which is self-love. Philautia can be positive, like self-confidence, but it can also be negative, like selfishness or ego. Capulet refuses to break off the engagement and continues on with the wedding plans without his daughter's consent because he is unwilling to back out of a promise he made to Paris. It was a matter of selfish pride. And what does it lead to? His daughter abandoning her family and ultimately dying. Juliet also makes very desperate and dangerous decisions because of her love for Romeo. In order to convince the friar that she'll do anything he asks, she lists all of the horrible things she would willingly endure. Then, in order to follow the friar's plan, she needs to take a potion that will put her to sleep for 42 hours. She knows that this is a risk, and even thinks that perhaps the potion is meant to kill her, so the friar can avoid being found out. She also thinks that even if it does work, there's a chance that Romeo won't be there when she wakes up, and she could die alone in the tomb. She even describes the graphic way in which she might go insane from being surrounded by dead bodies, and then beat her brains out with a bone. Horrifying. But despite all this danger, she feels she must do it. She tells the friar that she would do anything without fear or doubt to live an unstained wife to my sweet love. Clearly, love has clouded her judgment, leaving her to feel that she needs to do anything, and even kill herself just so her love isn't stained, even though in her religion, suicide is the ultimate stain. Next up, time. This act definitely leaves the audience with a sense of being rushed. Of course, we see this in the change of the wedding from Thursday to Wednesday, which is the very next morning. This creates added conflict since it means that the friar's plan needs to be moved up by a day as well. Juliet herself demonstrates the same sense of urgency when she tells the friar that unless he can immediately come up with a solution to prevent her from marrying Paris, she will kill herself right now. Another interesting way that Shakespeare reinforces this rush is through Act 4, Scene 4. The whole scene is not even 30 lines long, and yet it takes place over several hours, starting out near 3 a.m. and ending after dawn when Paris is arriving. If this were in an old movie, there would be a montage of cooking and decorating, or a spinning clock or something. Shakespeare is speeding us toward the inevitable conclusion. Now let's briefly talk opposition. Remember that rosemary from Act 3? Well, here it is again. I didn't mean literally, Cooper. Look at this mess. Anyway, Friar Laurence mentions that the rosemary that was meant to be used for the wedding should now be used to adorn Juliet's corpse. Capulet then adds on to this, saying, all things that we ordained festival turn from their office to black funeral. The hymns will become dirges, the bridal flowers will be placed on a corpse. We're reminded of how the opposition of Montague and Capulet led to this tragedy, turning what could have been happiness into grief. In this act, Juliet has sealed her destiny. By taking the potion, she has removed her ability to make decisions, her will, her self-determination. She won't wake up again until the last scene of the play, meaning that she is leaving the rest up to chance, or at least up to those around her. Friar Laurence discusses fate by discussing religion. When he is first told of Juliet's death, he mentions to Juliet's parents that heaven and yourself had part in this fair maid. He seems to be hinting that not only God, but also Capulet and Lady Capulet played a part in Juliet's death. He then warns the parents, the heavens do lower upon you for some ill. Move them no more by crossing their high will. In other words, he's saying that Juliet's death shows that God is unhappy with the Capulets, and so they should try not to anger him anymore. He's blaming her death on both fate and the feud. Of course, we know that he knows that Juliet's not actually dead, so he's really just using the belief in a higher power against the Capulets to guilt them into ending the feud, and also getting Juliet in that tomb quickly. Tricky guy, that friar. Today, I'd like to leave you with some food for thought. Consider these questions as you review the act and move forward toward the conclusion of the play. First, the friar's plan seems a little complicated. Is there another option that could work better? Second, Juliet shares a lot of fears in her soliloquy before taking the potion. Which of those fears, if any, seem rational? Which seem illogical or unlikely? Third, what do you think about Juliet's choice to abandon her family and let them believe her to be dead? Is her lie okay because she's doing it to be with her husband? Fourth, what do you think of Lord Capulet now? And finally, why do you think Shakespeare included several comedic elements in this act? What purpose does comedy serve in a tragedy? Thanks for watching this episode of Piper's Paraphrases. And, to quote Juliet, ugh.